Joining us now, NBC4 Washington investigative reporter Scott MacFarlane, and NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent and host of Way Too Early, Casey Hunt. Thank you both for being with us. Scott, you've been looking into this, and the investigative angle of this has many focuses, not only just trying to arrest those who were there, the insurrectionists, and charge them, but also the political angle of really trying to prove to the American people, and a large portion of it, that is trying to be told something different about what happened there. What can you tell us?
Hey, Mika, good morning. Let's start with this. We are closer to the starting line than the finish line of the prosecutions and potentially with the investigation. Think of where we were 6 months ago this morning. They were setting up the rafters at the White House ellipse. Those pipe bombs were sitting active, dangerous, and ominously outside the Republican and Democratic Party headquarters. And people involved with this insurrection were storing guns at a hotel in Ballston, Virginia, getting ready for what the feds say was a quick reaction force, a second wave, if and when Donald Trump invoked the Insurrection Act. And insurrectionists were arming themselves with bear spray, hockey sticks, baseball bats, a sharpened American flag, ready for action here. We know of the 516 federal arrests so far. Seems clear there are hundreds more to come. But there are things we don't know. We don't know who left the pipe bombs. We don't know who is responsible for this horrible attack against a New York Times photographer that was revealed in court filings last week, where they cornered her, asked her who she worked for, they grabbed her credentials, saw it was the Times, and the feds say they knocked her over, took her camera, ran off, and that others in the crowd taunted her. We don't know who those people are yet. And most importantly, Mika and Joe, we don't know where this legal road ends, with whom or with what.
So, Casey Hunt, we look at 6 months later, we look at this video, and you were there that day, and there are so many people in the crowd who spent the 2020 election screaming about law and order and defending the blue. You look at the lies that have been spread over the 6 months. First, it was the lie that these weren't Trump supporters. Well, Kevin McCarthy shot that down as he was screaming and swearing at the president on the day of the storming of the Capitol, swearing to the president that he was there. How stupid did Trump think he was, that those were his supporters. Then there was a lie that nothing dangerous happened that day. Ron Johnson said, I had no reason to be concerned. The video proved that to be a lie. Then there was a lie that these were just tourists. These were just regular tourists. And then we saw that the member of Congress who said that was actually barricading himself with Capitol Police behind the entrance to the House chamber. And now these so-called defenders of police officers won't acknowledge them, won't talk to them, won't thank them. We've seen some Capitol officers go in and be completely ignored by Republicans. Police officers that were beaten within inches of their life, who thought they were going to die that day. This is not defending the blue. It's the antithesis of supporting law enforcement officers.
Yeah, Joe, I mean, the thing about all of that revisionist history is that we have these videos to play. We don't, I was there, I saw it with my own eyes. We don't have to listen. This is not something where you have to report, oh, so-and-so said this. In fact, the reality is very obvious and completely different than what now people are trying to say or claim actually happened that day. And I'd be interested to know what Ron Johnson thinks Mike Pence might have been worried about. I mean, obviously they weren't chanting hang Ron Johnson, but they were chanting hang Mike Pence. I think one significant and serious question here, Joe, is what happens next? There's already some discussion and concern about August, because there is this theory out there that is a time when former President Trump will be reinstated. And so there's some chatter on these bulletin boards about whether this is something that is actually going to occur, and questions about whether they have actually adequately addressed the security issues at the Capitol, considering that the police force is still operating well below the levels that it's supposed to, because they're having such trouble with recruitment and morale, because, as you point out, these officers just, they don't feel supported. And so I think there's some increased nervousness around that. And, I mean, I think one thing that's becoming clear, too, and a lot of Scott's great reporting on this has shown that it was actually very organized by these extremist groups. And in some cases, they took advantage of people who were there protesting politically or showed up to support Donald Trump, who weren't necessarily prepared and ready to do this, but who ultimately followed along. And you see a lot of them in the rotunda. But that element that is organizing is incredibly dangerous. And whether our government is prepared to take that on and to be on top of it, I think, is really the big question that we should all be asking day in and day out.
Hey, Scott, Casey gave me a perfect segue to ask you about those next steps. Like, what is being done here in terms of both the prosecution, in terms we've seen a couple, we've seen, I believe, one or two of the sentences so far. Like, what are prosecutors looking at, particularly for those like maybe the Oath Keepers or Proud Boys who were involved? But also, what is law enforcement doing to keep their eyes, if you will, on them to prevent something like this from happening again, whether it is something as dramatic as a storming of the Capitol in August, but with this nonsensical Trump reinstatement theory, but even perhaps smaller things like protests at state capitals or other events, that political movements that could become very dangerous and violent.
So, Jonathan, the first thing is you have to manage expectations about the timetables here. These prosecutions, in some ways, are making progress. With the accused Oath Keepers, this far-right group accused of conspiracy, of plotting and planning ahead of the 6th, the feds have already secured 3 plea agreements, and all of those defendants have agreed to help the feds. They've flipped. But there are dozens more of Oath Keepers, Proud Boys, 3%ers. Those cases are in their infancy. Now, about hardening the Capitol, as Casey mentioned, the new spending bills, the appropriations bills that Congress has passed out of committee and could pass later this year, call for hardening of the Capitol. Bullet-resistant doors, new shot spotter, gun tracing systems in the Capitol complex. What was once thought to be unnecessary in a complex guarded by 2,000 Capitol police officers now seems very much necessary and has already received bipartisan support. So that's where we are. We have case timelines that go into 2022. That's the first big trial date, January 2022. The hardening of the Capitol, that could happen sooner to better protect lawmakers.
NBC4 Washington investigative reporter Scott MacFarlane, thank you very much for coming on the show this morning.